Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Lunch and Learn, a partner series between the Prince George's County Memorial Library System and the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights, the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. My name is Tiana Davis. I'm the outreach specialist with the Office of Human Rights. With me today as co-host is Dr. Audrey Lau, the teen services specialist with the library system. We are so glad you've chosen to spend your time with us as we welcome another fantastic guest to Lunch and Learn, Brian Goldstone. Brian Goldstone is a journalist whose long form reporting and essays have appeared in the New York Times, Harper's Magazine, The New Republic, the California Sunday Magazine, and Jacobin, among other publications. He has a PhD in anthropology from Duke University and was a Mellon Research Fellow at Columbia University. In 2021, he was a National Fellow at New America, and he lives in Atlanta with his family. Thank you for joining us today, Brian. To get us started, can you talk to us a little bit about how you got started with There's No Place for Us?
Yeah, thank you. It is so good to be with you. And thank you for the invitation. So the way I got started on this project actually came through my spouse, Elaine. Elaine is a nurse practitioner, and she, for many years, was working at a community health center in Atlanta where we live, called Mercy Care. And we share a car. So every day I would pick her up from work and we would debrief our days. And she began to tell me about this trend she was noticing where one patient after another at the clinic, they were working at Amazon warehouses. They were working at Walmart. They were driving for Uber and Lyft. They were employed in caregiving positions like home health aides or daycare workers. One person was even working on movie sets here in Atlanta, where the film industry is booming. And when they were finishing their shifts, all of these people, they told my wife they weren't going to an apartment. They were homeless. They were sleeping in their cars. They were living in the overcrowded apartments of others temporarily, as long as they could. They were going to shelters if there were any shelter beds available. Some were sleeping in tents, and many were also living in these squalid extended stay hotels and motels that have been proliferating across the region. And when Elaine told me about this, I was shocked. I had read a lot about poverty. I'd read a lot about homelessness. And I had never seen the link between employment and homelessness explicitly thematized, much less properly investigated and discussed. And I think, like many people, I had this assumption that a job was an exit from this most severe form of deprivation, not an accompaniment to it. And I remember around that time, I typed in the words working homeless into an academic search engine, expecting to find this plethora of literature on the working homeless. And on the contrary, I found virtually nothing. Where work was discussed, it was negative. It was what was missing from homelessness. And one of the canonical texts, Peter Rossi's Down and Out in America about homelessness in the United States, he had this formulation that those who are homeless in this country are, quote, unconnected to the world of work. So, this observation that my wife had was the initial spark that led me to first follow one family in Atlanta over a period of several months for a magazine story for the New Republic. And when I finished that, I realized I had just scratched the surface of this phenomenon, this sort of rise of the working homeless. And far from being some bizarre anomaly, what I was seeing in Atlanta or what my wife was observing, I realized it was actually very much representative of a trend across the country, and that the people who I would go on to write about for this book, the 5 families who I would follow for nearly 6 years, that their experiences of working and working and working some more, of working not just one job, but often multiple jobs, and still not being able to secure a roof overhead, still not being able to secure this most basic human necessity, a place to live, that this was happening to people around the country, and that they were very much invisible, not just invisible, but actively rendered invisible, that there's this entire world of homelessness that I wasn't seeing, that we weren't seeing, that we're not seeing, and that the people I'm writing about actually comprise the overwhelming majority of those who inhabit that invisible world of homelessness. And so that's really what the book aims to shine a light on, is this devastating trend of a growing chasm between what people are earning in their jobs and what it costs to afford a place to live, and that certainly has shown no sign of abating.
So I don't even know where to start. This book made me so angry. But so did I understand correctly, like very early in the book, Georgia does not require landlords to ensure their properties are habitable?
Yeah. During the whole time I was reporting this book, there was no law in Georgia requiring landlords to sort of certify the habitability of their properties. That has since changed. There was legislation at the state level that is now requiring apartments to be habitable. Enforcement is an entirely different thing, but the glass half full perspective is yes, like finally there is at least an acknowledgement of just how predatory the system here in Georgia and in many states across the country really is for renters, and that is slowly beginning to change. But yeah, for the whole time I was reporting this book, there was no law in the books, and I don't know if this is what you were about to get to, but yeah, I mean, one of the families in the book ends up, the first domino that falls that pushes her and her family into homelessness was the fact that her landlord refused to fix a hot water heater for weeks and weeks and weeks, and she couldn't bathe her kids, and she decided not to pay rent. And there was no, that was perfectly legal for her landlord to withhold this essential thing. But yeah, I mean, it was very much symptomatic, I think, of what tenants were dealing with.
So one of the things that we talk about being angry at this book, not because of the way, I mean, it's a great book. It was fantastic. It really was a call to action, at least on my end. But it's one of the few books in recent years that does not provide stories intermixed with commentary from the author. You allow these stories to take primary, we learn about Brittany and Kara and Michelle and Celeste and Maurice and Natalia, and each chapter is just a piece of their life. And we spend days in their shoes, enduring bad news, hope, roadblocks, despair, like moments of kindness. Was this your intent when you were writing? What was your, when you said, I want to write a book about this, because we really get to know these characters. I mean, I felt, and we can get into that a little bit, but, was that the intent, was to let them talk?
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate that question. Because yes, that was totally my intention. My background as an anthropologist before I became a journalist really, it led me to approach this reporting less as a journalist might, who kind of drops in, knows what the story is in advance, and is simply trying to get as much material to kind of corroborate that story or flesh it out. I wanted, on the contrary, to sort of just immerse myself in the day-to-day lives of these families as much as humanly possible. And I'm happy to also speak to how that process even began and how I met them. But that was my intention. My intention was to just to allow readers as much as humanly possible to feel what it's like to be them. I recently did an event with one of my heroes, the labor organizer and dynamo, Sarah Nelson. It was actually an event in Washington, D.C. at Politics and Prose. And she said something about the book that has, in retrospect, become a kind of like guiding impulse for me in writing the book. She said that before we can fix this crisis, we first have to feel the crisis. And that just resonated so strongly for me because, you know, whether someone is coming to these issues for the first time or has just, you know, sort of been desensitized to all the statistics about homelessness, all the statistics about the housing crisis, even people who have been steeped in housing policy or the world of homeless services, I wanted everyone who encountered this book to get past these abstractions and to truly feel in a visceral way what it's like for parents, for their kids, when one of the most basic human necessities is always out of reach. And so, yeah, it just felt really, really important to render people in the fullness of their humanity. Also to start the stories, not in these moments of disaster, of crisis, but in moments of relative stability. You know, one chapter begins, we meet Michelle for the first time when she's wearing a Santa hat and making Christmas Eve dinner for her kids. And, you know, the chapter ends not in this like really dramatic way, but with her and her kids and her fiance building a gingerbread house and her toddler falling asleep on the couch. And that was really intentional. That was really important to me because so often in reporting and research on poverty, academic research, journalism, we only see people in their most anguished moments. And it just seemed really crucial to show people in moments of happiness, of joy, of laughter, just being their regular selves. And, you know, and in that respect, it also seemed really crucial to, I feel like there's an impulse, a well-intentioned impulse among a lot of people who write about these issues. It's like they feel like they have to present the subjects of their article or their book as almost like angelic figures, you know, people who can do no wrong, who are unblemished, who are just heroically going to work each day and taking care of their kids. And to be sure, there is a lot of heroism in this book. The resilience that these families show is like preternatural. I mean, it's incredible. But I think it can be just as dehumanizing to deny people their flaws, to deny people the choices that they themselves regret making, to deny people the anger, the flashes of anger that come out in moments of desperation or depression or anxiety, as it is dehumanizing to simply show people in this like pathologized way, you know, as just like bad and judging them. So yeah, I really hope that above all, when readers encounter this book, they encounter true human beings, and that actually, in feeling the crisis, that will galvanize them to want to fix this crisis and to end it.
I think you did a very good job at that. Like you said, there were multiple moments in the book where, you know, a mom snaps at a kid, and I'm like, maybe that's not the best way to handle it, but I would probably do the same if I were under the same amount of stress that some of them were under. Um, and so I was wondering, one, can you tell us about how you met the 5 subject families? And also, can you talk about the difficulties of like staying out of the mix, so to speak? Because at one point, I think 2 of your subjects were living in the same hotel.
Mm. Yeah. So how I met them, it happened differently in each of the 5 families' cases. It was a long process of first meeting them and then certainly building the trust necessary to facilitate this level of intimacy, this level of access into their day-to-day lives. As I mentioned, you know, this book sort of grew out of a magazine story that I reported, and one either virtue or vice that I have as a journalist is that I spend way too much time, or not too much time, just a lot of time reporting, even when I'm doing a magazine story. And in this case, the benefit of that was that I kept like the central protagonist, the family who I wrote about for the New Republic story, even after like the story was filed and it was off to my editor, I continued to go with them to food pantries and to church and to meet with caseworkers and meet with their pastor to get advice and all sorts of things. And in the process of doing that, I just met tons and tons of other people who were both in the trenches of trying to address the suffering and, other families and individuals who are experiencing the same thing. One thing about someone who wants to write about the working homeless or homelessness in general or housing precarity in general is, unlike certain journalistic topics, like an expose where you're struggling to find the one whistleblower, the one character who's going to expose these trends. In my case, there was no shortage of people who fit the description I was looking for, which is just like people who are employed and who are struggling to keep housing, to secure housing. And so there it was really less a matter of like finding the right people than it was narrowing it down and really the question of who is going to allow me into their life, into their world in such a way that the kind of visceral the kind of visceral feeling that I was trying to evoke, that the people would feel what it's like to be them, to live in their shoes, would be possible. And so, one of the families I met one night, it was actually Michelle, who I was just describing, wearing the Santa hat. I first met her when a church volunteer called me late one night and said, "Hey, I was supposed to bring food to this family who's now they're homeless. I just checked them into this extended stay hotel on Candler Road. My car broke down. Would you be able to bring them food for me?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And so I stopped by Little Caesars and got a bunch of pizzas and pulled up to the parking lot of Efficiency Lodge late on a Friday night. And that was my first encounter with Michelle. And that was also my first encounter with Efficiency Lodge, which would go on to be almost a character in its own right in this book, a really key site and a place where I sort of embedded myself for over a year. And so, I went on to meet Celeste at that hotel shortly after that. I met Britt when a relative of hers put me in touch with her, who saw a post that I put on Facebook. I met Maurice and Natalia through this message board called In Need of Housing in Georgia, where they were posting about, like, does anyone know of any landlords who will accept a family with an eviction on their record, and so forth. So it happened in these kind of unexpected ways, and it was really slow. And I'll just say, like, looking back, it feels utterly miraculous that this came together, because given like what these families were dealing with at the time, how maxed out they were, that they would give me this kind of access to their lives, would allow me to just be around. I mean, there are no words for the kind of generosity that implies and the kind of gift that was. And I think it had a lot to do, even the trust building had a lot to do with me presenting it more as a kind of collaboration. Like instead of, I want to write about homelessness, well, can I follow you? It was like, Michelle, I see what your life is like. I see what it's like here at the hotel. People need to know what this is like. People need to know the barriers that you're facing. How can we do that? How can we allow them to see? And so we got creative together, like getting dash cams for when Kara is delivering DoorDash with her 4 kids crammed in the car during the pandemic. And, and I got digital recorders for the families so that they could be recording the ambient sort of sounds of everyday life when I wasn't able to be with them. I think they sort of embraced it in that kind of collaborative way. I know I've talked for a while, but I'll just speak super quickly to that very, very hard and important question about, like, I think you put it, Tiana, like, how did I kind of stay
out of the mix?
Stay out of the mix, yeah. So part of that kind of collaborative conversation about making this a collaboration, and how can we make this work, and how can it really be a true, honest picture of what your life is like, is, I had to say, like, part of that is I can't be like giving you large sums of money. I can't be intervening in these really huge ways, because then I'll be manipulating the very circumstances that I'm ostensibly documenting. And so we just had to all be kind of clear from the beginning about what my role was, what is my lane here. And that was hard. Any journalist or researcher who isn't kept up at night by that tension of like, what do I do with the fact that I'm observing this pain and I want to stop it? I want to ameliorate it. I want to intervene. Anyone who isn't kept up at night by those questions, I simply don't trust them. I don't think that, I think you've given up something of your humanity when you're no longer struggling with that question. I will say that one way that was alleviated or mitigated for me a bit was I had the good fortune of also kind of following around in the course of this reporting a woman named L.A. Pink, Laquana Alexander, who ends up being, I hope when readers meet her in the book, they feel the way I felt when I met her, which is that like the sun is like shining through the clouds for a moment, like, or whatever the metaphor you want to use, that like a sense of relief. And I was able to sort of be with her. So like in moments where there was acute need, she was often the one who I could sort of peer over her shoulder as she is intervening, as she is trying to get people the support that is available, which often is non-existent. But that was mitigated a little bit by her presence. And finally, I'll just say that like one of the hardest things was not necessarily like, do I give money or not give money? And I should, like, I did buy groceries, I bought gas cards, smaller things like that. But it was a lot harder at times to know, like, do I give information? Do I give knowledge? One of the most harrowing and, for me, just completely gut-wrenching parts of this whole reporting process is a part in the book where Kara it's clear that she's about to be scammed at this rental property that she thinks is legit, but the landlord is telling her she has to send, I forget what the amount was, like a $1,500 security deposit immediately, or else he was going to give this amazing house to another family. And at first, I thought it was legit. I was there with her. I was videotaping it, thinking this was going to be the happy ending to her story, that she was going to get into this home. And as it gradually dawned on me, no, this is too good to be true. I was like, and she's on speakerphone with the landlord. I was like, what do I do? What do I do as a human being in this moment? What do I do as a journalist? Do I grab her phone and smash it on the ground? Because I was like, Kara, can you call him back? She didn't want to hear it. She did not want to hear it from me. And so that was an awful, awful moment where, like, even when I'm trying to intervene, and I'm just like, even if this like compromises her role in the book or what, I don't care. Like, she can't send this money. Even when I was trying to intervene, she didn't want to hear it. And the day ended much the way the chapter ends for the reader, which is me not knowing whether she was going to send the money. So there were a lot of situations like that as well.
We do have a question from the audience, so I'm going to go ahead and put it up. She says, Sister Sage, who's one of our regulars, do some people choose to become unhoused? Is that an intended lifestyle? Do some people profit from this lifestyle?
Yeah, it's interesting because since the 1980s, and it's important to emphasize this can't be said enough, when mass homelessness first erupted in the United States, it has not always been with us. Homelessness as we currently know it has not been a permanent feature of the American city. This is a relatively recent phenomenon, but when it was first erupting, there was a very concerted campaign, a concerted strategy on the part of the Reagan administration, which was in power at that moment, to present homelessness, this humanitarian catastrophe, that's really what it was, that was erupting, to present it as anything but a product of very deliberate policies that were allowing that crisis to emerge. So like the decimation of the social safety net, the gutting of funding for public housing and low income housing rental subsidies, so on and so forth. The growing precariousness of work with the diminishment of labor power and union power. So in the midst of all of that, there was an attempt to say, no, Reagan famously used the term, in fact, that homelessness is a lifestyle choice, that some people just choose to live on the street, or it was presented as the result of all sorts of other personal failures or pathologies like mental illness or addiction, or and meanwhile, even at that time, the fastest growing segment of the homeless population in America were children under the age of 6, right? But no one was talking about that back then. That wasn't what was on the cover of our magazines, where we learned about sidewalk psychotics and, you know, so that propaganda effort, I don't think it's too strong to call it that, was really successful. And there's a lot of people today who believe that unhoused people, homeless people who we see on the street, to say nothing of the hundreds of thousands of families who we don't see on the street, who are hidden away, that this is that this is their fault, or that this is their choice. To be clear, homelessness is a choice. It's just a choice that we as a society have made and continue to make every day. It's a choice that we as a society make, and that our government makes through its budgets, right? Through its priorities. So yes, homelessness is a choice, but I've never met a single person who just said, oh, I want to have this kind of acute insecurity. I want to not have a roof overhead. Of course, you will meet one person here, someone who suffers from PTSD and can't be indoors for an extended period of time, and who needs a more sort of nomadic lifestyle. Okay, fine. Like, there may be isolated instances like that, but to suggest that homelessness in this country is an individual lifestyle choice is just, there is absolutely zero evidence to support that. And again, I think it just can't be said enough that what causes homelessness is, this is going to sound really profound, what causes homelessness is not having a home, specifically not having a home, access to a home that you can afford. And the solution to homelessness is getting people homes, getting people housing with other wraparound services that they might require or need. But that is what causes homelessness. And the reason why homelessness is spiking, is skyrocketing in certain areas of the country, certain regions and not others. The one variable in what causes that is not mental illness, because there are parts of the country with disproportionately high rates of mental illness. It's not addiction, because opioid addiction and other addiction has ravaged communities where we don't see homelessness. What causes homelessness in these regions is a growing gap between people's incomes and what it costs to have a place to live.
One of the things I think that speaks to this, that was really, and maybe Tiana has this thought too, is when the passage depicting Kara and her children first night sleeping in their car. I had one of those moments where it's like, oh, it can't be that bad, right? And I came home from work and I kind of just sat there and it was dark, and watching people walk by and everything. And I thought, where would I want to sleep in DC? I mean, there's a lighted space in my apartment complex. There's cameras, and the people I'm not comfortable sometimes parking, let alone, and just that harrowing. Just the way you worded it was just so, because she was like, this is her first, and she gives them a nice meal, and she's putting it off. And, it was so terrifying, and having this person at a Quick Trip, like, volunteer to watch over them.
Yeah.
Must have been terrifying as well, because, you know, a lot of us know what happens at small convenience stores in the middle of cities. But just some man that you don't know as a woman, you know, with three children, you know, I don't know how you do it. And I was just curious how that went, like, from your perspective, because it was hard.
Yeah. You know, as you were just talking, it occurred to me that how how do I want to put it? The violence of euphemisms that we use to describe this kind of reality. There are now entire spaces in our country called safe parking lots. The city of Cincinnati just opened its first parking lot at a school for school children at that school whose families are homeless, for them to sleep in their cars in the parking lot. In Colorado, there was an article in the New York Times earlier this year about workers at local resorts who have to show proof of employment at the entrance of a parking lot because there's so little space for all of the homeless workers who need to sleep in their cars. So you have to show proof of employment, and these people have kids with them. And so these euphemisms, safe parking lots, and even euphemisms like the cost of living crisis or the affordability crisis, or even the word homelessness itself, it masks an absolutely gutting and often horrifying reality for the people experiencing it. And, you know, for Kara, that first night in the car and subsequent nights in the car, what was so hard for her wasn't just the logistics of like, okay, I'm going to be running my air conditioner all night, wasting precious gas, wasting money I don't have, because, you know, and like, how am I going to get the kids ready for school in the morning? My son wakes up before dawn, needs to use the bathroom. So I have to take him to use the bathroom. It wakes the other kids up. Like, just the logistics, the practical, physical barriers to like just doing that and living that way are so acute, so present. But, you know, what was also terrifying for her, and this is really important to stress, is that, you know, she was scared that a cop would knock on her window and call Child Protective Services because over a third of child removals in Georgia, as in many other states across the country, are the explicit result of what is categorized as inadequate housing. So it is a very justified fear that not only will you experience like the hardship of living in this way, of living in your car with your kids, but like you could really lose them. And, you know, the same state that takes your kids away, because even if you've begged that same state, that same Child Protective Services, or here in Georgia, it's called DFACS, beg them for housing assistance to like prevent the eviction that is coming, that same agency, that same state won't hesitate to pay a foster family triple the amount, quadruple the amount per month that you needed to maintain your housing, pay that to a foster family to separate your kids and to keep them with someone else. So that is a reality a lot of these families are facing. And it just contributes to the stress, the depression, the anxiety. Public health researchers, they use the term toxic stress to describe what these families, these kids are exposed to. And I think, you know, we should linger on that phrase, toxic stress that is so chronic and so debilitating that it can literally alter long-term physical and mental development. That it can literally alter like brain chemistry. That is toxic stress. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about these safe parking lots or families forced to live in their vehicles, and also all these other spaces like these hotel rooms that are really like what I refer to as extremely profitable homeless shelters with slum conditions.
So anyone who spends any solid amount of time on social media will inevitably come across a post that says something like, what's a positive if you're rich and a negative if you're poor? And someone will usually say like homelessness or living in your car. And so I was reminded of that when you were talking about the choosing home, or the question was asked about, do people choose homelessness? And so I was wondering, like, what makes people, and I'm asking this because you mentioned in the book about the co-living communities, like, is it We Live, which I think used to be owned by WeWork, and there was one called Common, and there was a TV show on ABC Family where the characters lived in a co-living situation. And so what makes that so attractive to people who can choose that, who have the what's the word? The privilege to choose that sort of situation, like to live in a van or to live in an apartment with a bunch of other people and share space.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't have a lot to say about that, except that those people are occupying a different universe than the families I'm writing about and the millions of people in this country like them. Just to put a couple of numbers on it, by the way, so that this is clear, right now in America, there are roughly 12 million households, not individuals, but households who fit the description of what's called severely cost burdened, which means they're paying more than half of their income on rent alone. And these are low income and extremely low income households. So the slightest setback, the slightest unanticipated expense, a medical emergency, a missed paycheck, a lapsed week of childcare, not getting your food stamps 1 month, can be the factor that pushes you into homelessness. It can be the factor that puts a scarlet E, an eviction on your rental history, that tanks your credit score, that tanks this 3-digit number that has come to determine whether millions of people in this country, people we might call the credit underclass, have access to something as basic as a place to live. That is the number of people who are right on the brink of homelessness right now. And to put a number on the families and individuals like those I write about in this book who have already joined the ranks of the unhoused, visible and otherwise in this country. The official numbers on homelessness over the last 2 years have been the highest level on record. But I argue that if we include the families I write about and all of the people like them, we're talking a population that is at least 6 times greater than the official number. So about 3 million men, women, and children who are homeless right now in America. And, the people who, because, you're talking about people who live in these, like, who want to live in these, like, co-living environments, pad split, that sort of thing. It also made me think of, like, van life, that whole thing, where influencers are, like, taking sexy photos of themselves with the ocean behind them and them living in their van. And sometimes when I have talked about this issue with people over the years, they're like, oh yeah, I know about people living in their cars, those people living in their van. It's like, it's just a different universe. It's like not even worth making the comparison, because one is like, to go back to that question, that truly is like a lifestyle choice that makes sense for whatever reason for that particular individual or family. And others, it's like, this is what they're forced into and they would never, ever, ever choose this. And it really just speaks to like a larger two Americas, as you might describe it, where in one America, you have people working multiple jobs and they still can't afford housing, even though they desperately want a place to live, a stable place to live. And in the other America, where housing is no longer a home, it's a portfolio to grow. It's an investment vehicle to grow in order to bolster already, relatively immense wealth. Those are the two Americas that we currently have.
I would like to go back to LA Pink, because as I was reading this book, I got to chapter 15 and I'm losing a lot of hope reading this book. And so chapter 15 starts off telling us about this woman you've met. She's got a bright pink mohawk. She's wearing a neon pink shirt. She's just an absolute diva. And I Googled her, and she's exactly the way you described her.
Yes, she is.
Was it just chance that she happened to show up in your story at that point, or was it intentional to have her as the sort of midpoint of your story?
No, I mean, in terms of the structure of the book and when she's introduced, that very much that was not clear from the outset. I should say that whatever is good about this book is largely attributable to the collaboration that I had, not only with the families but with my editor. I was blessed and am blessed to have just an incredible editor, Amanda Cook, who we spent months and months and months outlining this book, simply outlining it before we even got to the writing process, because she saw rightly like how important it was to structure the book in such a way that it feels readable, that people want to keep turning the pages. And that was not easy. When you have 5 different families and all these other people in the book, like L.A. Pink, like Carla Wells, the case manager, it was really important to create a structure where that chronology can move forward, where these 5 overlapping stories kind of go together. And so, yeah, so that was like, I would be lying if I was like, oh yeah, I had this master plan from the beginning. I knew Pink and was kind of, as she would put it, moving with her long before she was actually introduced in the book. And that was just one of the incredible gifts of not just this reporting process, but of my life, to meet her. I mean, she is a truly amazing human being, and she's an example of how those who have the least to give are consistently giving the most. Like, she was the one who would show up at 1 a.m. with a box of tampons or a bag of groceries or whatever people needed. And she practiced what I've come to call a kind of radical availability. And right now, as 42 million people in this country are facing the very real prospect that in a few days, they're not going to have food stamps anymore, that their groceries are they're not going to be able to afford their groceries the same month as Thanksgiving. It's people like L.A. Pink across the country who are filling the gap, who are showing up for their neighbors and practicing a kind of mutual care or mutual aid that is utterly vital, and is becoming more vital as our government institutes a policy, a choice of engineered abandonment.
I'm actually going to ask a question from my manager, who she's traveling to Botswana right now, so she couldn't be here, but she absolutely loved the book and wanted to be here. She says, Kylie is irritated by the current move to say unhoused rather than homeless. Her experience, and that of any of the homeless people she's met, is that euphemistic gymnastics do not help the problem, and she was happy to see you not being afraid to use the word homeless. And to give you a little backstory, Kyla herself was homeless. She was a single mother of 2 children at one time. One of them has special needs. And she is okay with me sharing that with you, by the way.
Yeah, I appreciate. Oh, sorry, I don't, Tiana.
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I don't like. How do I put it? I mean, at a moment like this that we're facing, like, I honestly don't care what words we use. I don't care if people feel like houseless is the term to use. I mean, there was a time when homeless itself was a term that was sort of introduced as a more humanizing, word than like hobo or vagrant or whatever else used to be. So, I mean, I don't have a dog in that fight, so to speak. Like, I do use unhoused sometimes. I say homeless. I I mean, I have found, like many people who have experienced homelessness themselves, that like sometimes it's the people who are like so keen to use the latest term and to be so like correct and proper in the term they use, who will also like, and they might have a yard sign, a Black Lives Matter yard sign, and they might also oppose the construction of a new shelter or an affordable housing development in their neighborhood because they want to protect their property values. So honestly, like I'm more concerned about like ending this absolutely preventable catastrophe than I am like the terms we use to describe it. And if there are people, especially those who are closest to the problem themselves, who are experiencing, who like they feel degraded by the term homeless, or they feel degraded by the term houseless or whatever, like I want to be sensitive to that. This kind of I just feel like it's a distraction from what really matters, which is like ending the suffering itself.
It's really interesting right now that we're having all of these crises kind of coalesce in the DC metro area. We have, a lot going on. Let's just say that. And one of the things that when reading your book, I had one of those moments where I found myself going, well, why did they do? And I went, stop, breathe, like don't judge, just read. And one of the things that I finished this book and I just, sat down, put the book down, and I said, I have to do more. We have this concept in America about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. We have this concept of deserving poor. We have, we only want to help these people who really need it. We have people with signs out on street corners, need some help, need a little help. How do you talk to people? I mean, as a tangible way to, kind of help people out there who might be listening to this now or later to help. How do you tangibly help and feel good about it? Like knowing, like, because people want to know that their money goes right. They don't want skimmed off. They don't want to,
Yeah. Yes, that is such an important question, and it's huge. And I could spend the next 3 hours talking about it because I've wrestled with it a lot. One misreading of this book is that it's like, oh, thank you, Brian. Thank you for exposing a segment of the homeless population that like is part of the labor force that's working, so I can have compassion for them. I'm going to continue to support policies that criminalize, demonize, and increasingly disappear homeless people from the streets because they're not so goes this logic. They're not the ones who are working, but thank you for giving us families and children and workers who we can feel sympathy for. And that, I mean, is the last thing I want this book to be saying. I mean, even just conceptually, I'm trying to argue that like these are not discrete types of homelessness. It's a spectrum of insecurity. And Michelle can be housed today in a hotel room tomorrow and sleeping in a MARTA station, as she did a year from now, or in a tent. This is a spectrum of insecurity. These are not discrete types of homeless people or types of experiences. So that's important to say. But yeah, this distinction between the deserving and undeserving poor, that is one of the most pernicious distinctions that we have in our language and in our imaginations. It has been so destructive. And, when I talk about the working homeless, I'm not trying to reinforce that distinction at all. I'm simply, and it's hard to toe this line because like, I do feel it's necessary to just point empirically and factually to the growing preponderance of people who are part of the nation's workforce, who are following the script that like post welfare reform, go get a job, don't be lazy, and these people have done that. And they've done it some more, and then they've done it some more, and they're working as much as they possibly humanly can, and it's still not enough. I think it's empirically important to point to that, Just like right now, there's a lot of rhetoric going around about food stamps. With SNAP about to be suspended in a few days, there's a lot of rhetoric floating around about why are 42 million people in this country not working? Why do we have that many people on food stamps? And it's like, are you for real? Are you that out of touch with what work looks like in this country right now? That there are entire companies who, as part of their onboarding procedures, show people how to apply for public benefits like food stamps, because those companies, those corporations are not paying a living wage to their workers or providing essential benefits. Like, that is the reality, that a huge number of people on food stamps, a huge number of people who are homeless, who require housing assistance, are part of not just the workforce, but are working for some of the most profitable companies on the planet. So it's important to say that clearly, but it's also important to say that having a job, being part of the workforce, does not earn you the right to housing. It does not earn you the right to food and other basic human essentials. There is nothing morally special about clocking in at a Captain D's every day. Like, there's nothing, like, that should be something that, like, there needs to first be a moral worth attached to workers and how companies value their workers before we can expect work itself to have this inherent, value. So yes, it's a really important thing what you're describing, and it's incredibly destructive. And I'll just say that in the richest nation on the planet, nobody should be without stable, safe housing. That should just be a crucial part of being a resident in this country, this richest nation on earth.
So can we take a moment to talk about the Roy Barnes of it all? And so for the people watching, Roy Barnes was the owner of Efficiency Lodge, which is a hotel that is greatly featured in the book. A lot of the subjects live there. He turns over his ownership of the hotel to his brother when he runs for public office. After public office, he becomes the hotel's legal counsel. So his brother still owns it. He's the legal counsel. Residents, they get locked out of the hotel. Some of them sue.
At gunpoint. At
gunpoint, including children, right, in the middle of the night. And was it winter or was it summer? It was one of the
It was like in the fall. It was in the
fall.
fall.
Okay, fall.
Yeah.
And then he later, after he gets sued and he loses and he appeals and he loses again, he opens a faith-based homeless shelter, right?
Yeah.
And so now his family continues to profit from Efficiency Lodge and their what they're doing to these families. But then he also gets to look like he's helping the situation.
Yeah. Just to clarify, because I don't want to get sued, he was like at the ribbon cutting ceremony for this new homeless shelter that was opening up, Must Ministries in Marietta. He doesn't actually run the shelter himself, but yeah, this is a former governor, a former Democratic governor in Georgia, who was at once a co-owner of this hotel, and then defended his brother, who was a current owner, after his brother hired a private militia, in effect, to go by room to room and force families out of their rooms at gunpoint with semi-automatic weapons, because the courts were closed and they couldn't, they wanted to get rid of these families. This is during the pandemic. And so, yeah, there's a lot to say about that. One thing is just how bipartisan the violence and abandonment, the violence against and abandonment of the working poor and just poor people in general, working class people in general, has been in this country, how bipartisan that has been. And this is not, certain Republicans might be better at, might be more explicit in their vilification of poor people or in the policies that brutalize them, but it truly has been bipartisan. Again, this is a Democratic governor, former governor, and And also to the question of like who's profiting off of all of this. And I realized that was part of that question earlier about, is homelessness a lifestyle choice, and are they profiting off of it? Homeless people aren't profiting off of this, suffice it to say. But there's that famous James Baldwin quote about how extremely expensive it is to be poor in America. And I think what this book tries to show through these families' experiences is the flip side of that, how extremely lucrative all of this precarity has become, how homelessness itself has become big business. And nowhere is that more starkly illustrated than in the fact that the very private equity firms and Wall Street investors who are buying up rental housing and making that housing increasingly volatile and insecure for the people living in it, and jacking up rents and using automated eviction systems and so forth, are also buying up the very places where people go once they lose their housing, once they become homeless. And Blackstone and Starwood Capital, they bought Extended Stay America, where Maurice and Natalia, who by the way are from Prince George's County, and flee gentrifying DC for what they thought was the Black Mecca of Atlanta, where they could afford to live. They end up at an Extended Stay America when they're homeless, them and their kids, and they call it an expensive prison. That very hotel chain was bought by Blackstone and Starwood Capital for $6 billion. Because again, there's a lot of money to be made off this suffering. And I think that's why it's not ending the suffering. Ending this crisis isn't just a matter of we need to build more market rate units, and as if it's just like the numbers aren't adding up. There's this mismatch between supply and demand. It's that there's a lot invested in this country financially in ensuring that this crisis is not only continuing, but actually worsens. And until we grapple with that fact, I think we will continue to just kind of nibble around the edges of solutions and kind of offer these like technocratic tweaks and half measures, when what we need is a thoroughgoing and ambitious vision of tackling the catastrophe at its root source.
I'm going to try to squeeze one last question in here. I know we're just about at time. For those of us who are in a position to help, where do we start? What can we do?
Compassion is wonderful. Empathy is great. And I hope that readers who pick up this book will feel more compassion and empathy. But really what I'm wanting them to feel, when I talked about feeling the crisis before we can fix it, I want them to feel angry. I want them to feel just a little bit of the anger, the rage that I felt while reporting this and seeing how at every turn in these families' stories, in their journeys, there were these entire systems militating actively against their stability. And how utterly preventable, avoidable all of this pain was for the parents and for these children. I want us to be shocked. I want readers to be angry and shocked about what we've allowed housing to become. And once that anger is there, and once you follow these families, then I hope we just start one by one from the low-hanging policy fruit of like trying to ban extortionate application fees or prejudicial tenant screening practices or habitability standards or just cause eviction laws, things that really can be enacted right now, to much more ambitious North Star kind of policies like building millions of units of social housing across the country where people can have safe, permanently affordable homes. I think that it's the anger mixed with empathy, mixed with a concern for our neighbors, mixed with a solidarity with those who are suffering, because we ourselves could be in their position at any moment, because the line separating housed from unhoused has become devastatingly porous. Once we see that reality, I hope it galvanizes readers, galvanizes all of us to both stand with others in very small, intimate forms of solidarity, but also to vote differently and to demand different policies from those who represent us.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I really wish we could have had you for another hour. I really had so much more I wanted to get into. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today and for writing this book.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you. And if anyone's watching and you want to reach out, I think I put my contact, my social stuff in the chat. So please reach out. I would love to hear from you.
Yes. And just for anyone who's listening and not really watching, you can find Brian on X and Instagram at Brian_Goldstone, BRIAN. And also on Blue Sky at Brian-Goldstone. And then also his website is briangoldstone.net. The absolute best way that you can support Brian is by purchasing There's No Place from Us from your favorite independent bookseller. Is it also available on your website, or?
Yes, it is. It is.
So also
go to the library if you can't afford it. Or
yes, it is available, ebook and physical, at the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. In light of today's conversation, I do want to remind everyone that in Prince George's County, discrimination based on housing is unlawful. Examples include denying a person housing based on their source of income due to their use of a housing voucher, or asking a rental applicant about their citizenship status. To learn more about fair housing in Prince George's County, you can visit civilrights.mypgc.us. And to see what events the library has coming up, you can visit pgcmls.info/events. Brian, thank you again so much for joining us. Everyone else, thank you for watching. And we will see you all next time. Goodbye.